Hi, I am Rebecca Miller-Webster. I am a Ruby and JavaScript developer, and I'm currently a lead developer at How About We.
And I'm Savannah Wolf. I'm a UX and visual designer, and I'm the head of design at How About We.
So we're here to talk to you about incremental design, which is a process we've been using at How About We to pretty successfully make design changes and have development and design work together.
Yeah. But before we talk about what incremental design is, we're actually going to talk about some of the ways that everyone here probably makes design changes. So when you're thinking of design changes, you're probably thinking in like a pretty large scale, and you're probably going to go down the road of a major redesign. And what this means for design and development is that you're really taking like a month or 2 months or 6 months of time, and you're dedicating your resources to creating this brand new experience, which is like awesome in theory.
Right.
But it usually doesn't work out to be maybe the smooth process that you're hoping for. As a designer, my experiences with big redesigns are that I dedicate my time and effort gathering requirements, making sure that the user experience is great and the visuals are beautiful, and then I just pass it off because I need to move on to other projects, and I don't always know where it ends because developers need a substantial amount of time to work on the design.
And as a developer, you get this PSD, and either you're frustrated because it didn't take technical considerations into the design or limitations, or you go off and you do it and you feel like you're a total CSS JavaScript rock star, and then it gets to design and they're like, what the fuck is this? This isn't what I designed, right?
So that's bad, and that's what we want to avoid. Okay, so maybe you break it down a little bit more. Maybe you have a page-by-page redesign, and you're like supporting this old design, you're creating a new one just on certain pages, maybe certain features, and it creates this like really weird experience for your users. And as a designer, I like don't really know what to design. Do I design a new feature in our old styles and our new styles? Do I create this like weird hybrid? And it's kind of confusing, and it's bad for users, and we just like basically want to avoid it.
And it can be just as confusing for developers. Like, it tends to lead to a lot of technical debt. You're supporting multiple style sheets, multiple layouts. You have to like remember if you're killing something, if you can kill these styles or not. So it's just kind of annoying. You mentally have to like know that that's there. You have to test and maintain it. It's just doesn't lead to happiness for anyone.
It's weird. So our solution is incremental design.
So as developers, and particularly the Ruby community over the past like 5-10 years, we've talked a lot about software development best practices and how to make software in a way that's maintainable and successful. And really all of those things, agile, TDD, sprints, boil down to making the smallest possible change and doing it in a maintainable, testable way, and then deploying it and just doing that over and over and over again. And basically, incremental design is about taking those same practices and philosophy to making design changes. So really simply, it's making tiny deployable design changes and just doing that over and over and over again.
And kind of the overall theme of what that creates is a communication between, or a conversation between design and development. So that means that we're talking more, and we're on the same page, and we're discussing these changes or challenges as we go. And we're really making the design more beautiful and more like the experience more awesome, and we're also making less friction in our teams.
So just to give you a little context, we work at How About We, which was founded in 2010 as a dating site that was focused less on like whether you like to go on long walks on the beach or like how much you drink or whatever, and more on proposing really awesome dates and finding other people to go on those dates with you. And then last year we launched How About We for Couples, which is a subscription site that's a curated collection of really awesome dates for couples to go on and sustain their relationship.
And what you're actually looking at here is our unified landing page, and it actually embodies our third product, which is the How About We brand. Our design team is relatively new. We're less than a year old. And basically our focus on top of these two products is creating this like universal design language for How About We and kind of evolving and enhancing the brand. So this is actually our dating site. And this is an old design that was created by an agency, and we're currently working on redesigning the entire experience. And we started that redesign process through our mobile apps. We've recently redesigned our iPad and iPhone and working on an Android redesign, and also now the full web redesign. And how we're driving out that design is through our couples product. So we've created this beautiful experience for our couples site. We really test and evolve the design on this product, and we're using this language, evolving it to our unified brand, and then translating it to our dating product.
So in addition to like the normal startup challenges of like aggressive timelines and changing models and pivoting and all that stuff, we have this extra challenge of having these two products that are in totally different places in their life cycle. So the dating site is established, it's international, we need to make sure that we're not disrupting their experience, that it keeps like rolling on and making us money and all that good stuff. And then on the other side, the couples site is like 6 months old. We've changed the model like 4 times. It's currently only in New York, although it's launching in San Francisco in a couple weeks. So SF people should sign up because it's awesome. So we needed a process that really worked for both sides of this equation. And then in addition, as Savannah mentioned with the brand, there's like a renewed focus in the company on having beautiful design and having that be part of everything that happens. And then on top of that, we make almost all of our feature decisions based on split testing and metrics. So that's sort of like an additional level that needs to be taken into consideration. And if you want to learn more about that, you should go see Brian Woods tomorrow because he's giving a talk on this. All right, so let's talk about an example.
So this is our couples product, and this is actually a date details page. So each date that we create on our service has this really beautiful experience that is really photo and experience heavy to help users understand really what they're getting for their money. This date in particular is a yoga instructor, comes to your home, teaches you a yoga lesson, maybe brings wine, like who doesn't love wine and yoga? But basically what we wanted to do, we initially launched as a members only service, and we wanted to open up buying dates to anyone. So anytime we kind of come across this, we want to test an idea in our existing design. So as you may be able to see a little bit, there's actually 2 prices on the side, and it worked out well. People liked the dual pricing. It was great for non-members to experience the site, and also great for members to see what a discount and what an advantage they got from membership. Okay, so once we know that something's great and then we want to dedicate some real design to it, we go into the design process, and here you can see this is like our end goal design. One thing you'll notice is this dual pricing on the side that is like a much more featured pricing structure, really outlines the comparison of membership and non-membership, and then creates these universal pieces of the design, like pricing, like a sub-nav, that we can use throughout the site. And really when we're designing, we're thinking like V3 because we really break down this design to what is necessary and what should be a priority. And from there, we pass it off to development, and they kind of work on what the next piece of this part is.
So you may have looked at that and been like, I could totally bust that shit out in half a day. And I'm sure that you could. But we're not going to do that. We didn't do that. We really wanted to break things down in the smallest possible components that we could. So the most obvious thing looking at this is just to move the rail from the right to the left, which feels really stupid and is in some ways, but it actually completely broke the experience on tablet and mobile. And it was actually really great that we got to have that conversation about what we wanted to do about it like almost immediately, as opposed to having it once people had sort of like emotionally invested in putting all this effort into it. And then even if we had done this later, because we're deploying everything in such small stages, we could have just reverted that one tiny part of this design instead of reverting the entire design in general. So in this particular case, we decided to move forward with some small tweaks because we had already prioritized a mobile-only version of this page anyway. But if we hadn't, we really could have made the best decision for the product instead of like getting people's emotions involved. So the next thing we did is change the pricing. So part of incremental design is really about having these reusable components of design that can sort of float throughout the site and can be reused everywhere. So this pricing is actually used on the homepage, the table of contents, billing, people subscribing and paying us. So it was really important that we do it in a super isolated way and that the user have a really consistent experience around our pricing. So the next thing we did was just move the nav to the top. And so this set a precedent of like where our sub-navs were going to be in general in the site. And you also may or may not notice that the bottom half of the rail is a lighter gray, which I know just hurts Savannah's heart, but she let us do it anyway.
I will. I think a big part of this is like some of the pieces from a design perspective like don't always look perfect, and that is painful, but like realistically will your users notice? And like this I think was maybe live for a day. So you really have to think about like what's best for your product versus like, oh, well, I'm a designer and this is beautiful, or like, oh, this is exactly how I want it because it's not really about you. So we kind of moved on and we let this happen. And the next step was obviously to fix the things that were kind of like paining our hearts. So we updated that, and we also added an internal navigation. Okay, so if you remember, this was like our visual ideal, and this is where we ended that project. And that's okay. From a design perspective, having these conversations and like really understanding like product decisions and prioritization, we knew that like one, we don't need to reskin these social buttons because we're like not really pushing social right now, or like we can come back to this design if we get to a point where we want to make these fine-tuning things, but we have bigger fish to fry, so we're going to go ahead with that. But basically what this process is like this feedback review loop. And anytime design starts a project, we start involving development immediately. So we get a design request, we start gathering requirements, we think about what we need to accomplish, and then as soon as we have like wireframes or options, we bring in development. And we ask kind of two questions. One being, is this possible? And because we work with awesome developers, the answer is usually yes. But I think the smarter, more important question is this possible in the timeline that you're actually going to have? And the answer to that is often no. But there are little tweaky things that we can do to our design to make it functional immediately. So one thing is we'll maybe have many options that we can talk about and figure out what would be the easiest thing to do. And on top of that, it's just like relying on developer knowledge to really get the most effective end product. And we're happy with that because then we know that our designs are actually going to become live. And then we pass it off.
And so once we get it, if possible, we actually build the feature with our existing styles without changing anything or very little. And then we go over to the designer and say, what do you think of this? What's the priority? What should we change? Maybe it's fine, maybe it's not. And often we kind of cut out some work by just doing that, and it also sort of makes sure that everything is consistent. And then regardless of whether we use existing styles or not, we always check in with design before we commit our code and do a pull request and deploy. And unlike a major redesign where you have this like 75-minute conversation and get like 85 million tweaks on the page, these are literally like 5 minutes or less, and it's usually like, can you just move that over 10 pixels or whatever? And so they're usually pretty straightforward, and the more that we do this process, the shorter those reviews become because everybody's kind of on the same page.
And you're building trust.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some like weird, unique things that we do in our design process? We actually are a little bit ideal at How About We, I think, because we had a young design team that was created after the product was already out there. But I think aligning yourself with development is kind of a huge deal. And as a designer, I've never like, even if I know about the agile process or I know that you work on sprints, like I'm not fully aware of all the like little pieces of that. So actually what we do at How About We is we use sprints, reviews, and retros in our design process. So as a design team, we work on 1 week sprints, and the developers actually work on 2 week sprints, but the idea of having sprints and like understanding how to organize your work in that way really helps understand how development happens. We even do estimation. So we might have 10 projects a week, and we assign them like their importance. So it's not exactly the same, but it's like in the same system, so we're understanding a little bit more how you can prioritize your work. And having these 1 week sprints really allows you to bring in these reviews, think about like when you can include people at the right time and not stressing yourself, and kind of maximizing on what's best for your creative process. And then finally, I mean, we talked about reviews, but retros are a big thing for us too, kind of like talking about this process, because we don't want to make it feel like a chore. Like, it should just feel like a conversation, and it shouldn't be like, oh, I have to check in with development right now or else they're going to hate me forever. It's just like a very like ongoing thing, but if there is something that we can improve, we do like to improve it.
Absolutely. Okay, so from a development perspective, there are a couple things that we've added to our development process to make this a little easier and a little smoother. And the first thing is that we got really strict about our styles. If we get a design, we often do a lot of pushback. Like, designers really have to think about adding new colors because we're going to fight with them if they want to do it. And all of that is just to make sure that you're adding styles because you really need them, and that things are kind of global and consistent throughout the site, and that everybody's on the same page. And the way that we really make that happen is that we have style guides. So we have an HTML style guide that is available to design and development. It uses our real style sheets. It exists in our app. So it's up to date with everything that's happening in our app, which is nice for everybody to see. It has our colors, our fonts, our grids, everything.
I mean, you guys probably have experienced the PSD style guide, and if you have, then you know that it's like never up to date, and no one has time to keep it up to date. And if something changes, like it stays wrong. So that's just bad, especially for designers, because we're like, oh, well, it's not in the style guide anyways. So, but yeah, I think it's a great tool to have because it is living, breathing, and right.
And then we also have a code style guide, which is actually on our GitHub account if you want to see it, but it just goes over our agreed upon practices for SASS and our views. And all of this is really just about making sure that everybody starts out on the same page. Like, they're all evolving and living, breathing things, but everyone starts from the same page, and if you want to change it, like, we have a conversation about it so that everybody is always like in the same place. The other thing that we did is that we moved to Semantic Markup. And this actually made a huge difference on a variety of levels. The first one, I just think looking at this, it's a lot clearer just going into your view, understanding what's happening here. You don't have like the mental clutter of having all the design classes everywhere. It also makes enforcing global styles much easier, because if you make a change, you don't have to go into every file that's referencing that class and change it and probably miss something. Instead, like, you just change it in your SASS and you're done. So obviously one of the main things that we use to make this happen is you have to generate your CSS. We use SASS, you could use less, it doesn't really matter. In addition to like the niceties of all of this, I think one of the big things about this is that you can start to look at your CSS as code and think about the same questions that you ask about your Ruby code, like, is this maintainable? Is this clear? Does this make sense? Can I reuse this component somewhere? All of those questions you can start asking because you can use some of the basic constructs of an actual programming language. So we use variables pretty extensively. And one thing to notice about this is that the name of the variables is about their meaning and not their value. So we started off with like font size 22, and then we needed to change it to 23. So then you either have to go into everywhere that's referencing font size 22, which was a class, and change it to 23, which again has like, you're probably going to miss something and screw something up. Or we changed 22 to mean 23, which is bad for obvious reasons. So instead we moved to a system like this, which has been really great. The designers totally know what all of our sizes are, and we actually changed our sizes again, and we're able to change them through the system, and it was almost painless.
Yeah, we actually, we initially had converted our own fonts to web fonts, and that was pretty terrible with rendering. So we did an upgrade on 2 of our fonts to be actual web design fonts, and that just changed your entire baseline of your font. So it was crazy. I mean, like, every single piece of font on our type on our site needed to be adjusted. And I think the other nice thing about this is having like a very small number of fonts that you can use for both of your typefaces or however many you have, because you shouldn't have 15 just because you have different type. That's just bad and weird and hard to remember what to use for what font.
And the other thing is, you don't just have to have global variables. So we use variables a lot that are scoped within classes for things like nav height. So something that is like 51 pixels, first of all, you're putting it near the top, you're giving it meaning for someone who comes back and looks at it. But it also means if you change that, everything that's offset by that, that has a margin based on that, is immediately fixed. So the next sort of codish component is that we use mixins really extensively, and we prefer them in general over extends. And part of this is like, this is a function, which means that we can make changes to this and we can inject this as sort of a composable object, and like thinking about composition anywhere in our CSS that we want. So this is a separator that we use basically everywhere. We use it on our modals, we use it on almost every page. And this makes it really easy just to have that style consistent, and we can just include it in whatever class that we need to include it in. Okay, so going back to our couples site, these are some of our dates. There's like a beer and mussels date, there's a gaming night, a whiskey tasting, this really cute peanut butter date that comes with a heart-shaped peanut butter sandwich for you and your partner. And these have our dual pricing that Savannah mentioned earlier. But as you can see, it's a little bit more complex than that. We have some members-only dates. Members get 1 free date a month. And also, if you've booked it, you see the price that you paid. Dates can be sold out. They can be expired. You can obviously be a subscriber or not, but also your partner could be a subscriber, which means we treat you like a subscriber, except when it comes to your credit card, because not everybody is, at the place where they're sharing credit cards. But the point is, we wanted to reuse this component, and there was just a lot of complexity on it. We started with a view that looks something like this. There's ternary operators to determine classes. There's a lot of if statements. And you just come into this, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? I have no idea. And so part of this is really about getting your logic out of your views. So we started with this 41 lines of code, and we got it down to 5. And I think just in terms of clarity, like you understand what's happening. I'm in the pricing control. There's a pricing definition. There are details. There's a status. It just kind of makes sense. And we obviously use helpers and decorators pretty extensively. We lean more towards decorators, but you could do the same things with helpers. And one of the first things that we started doing was generating classes. And this started because like members only, something was floated, or like if it was sold out, it was booked or whatever. It was gray. And so we wanted to just generate that and be able to test that logic and do it in a really conscientious, maintainable, clear way. But we also did things like there were places where there was a free class that was only on the copy, and we actually moved it up to sort of the top-level pricing div. And part of what this started to feel more and more like is thinking of that DOM object as an actual object with state, that those classes are about the state of that date and the permutations and how it interacts with the user and all of those things. And then you can take that same idea and speak to designers, and they understand because the state is booked and the user's not subscribed, and what does it look like in that state. And then we can let the CSS do its thing and cascade down that DOM object. And more, this gave us a lot of flexibility to make changes without changing our markup.
Especially for design, where we want to like emphasize certain things or change things as we like learn more about our product and what our users need. So it's a really great global way that we can understand design, and we don't have to design every state all of the time because we really don't have time for that.
And all of the markup is consistent across all of the states. It's really about the CSS, which changes the visual indicators. So you can also use this technique, and we do successfully for copy as well as any HTML attributes. At least in Haml, you can just pass it a hash. We use that a lot for forms, for analytics tracking, for things like popping a sign-in modal. And all of that is great, but really what you're doing is creating really encapsulated, isolated components that you can test by themselves. So when you do a view test, you're basically, at least in our spec, you're getting a string of HTML and you're doing a bunch of regex on it. It's not a particularly like isolated or precision way to test the logic in your code. And now we're testing it in a very limited scope, in the correct scope, with context that we know and understand, sort of like the basic why you do TDD and how to do it well. The other thing that we do is encapsulate things into partials, which is obvious. We all use partials. They're great. And I think it's really obvious to encapsulate things when things repeat consistently, or there's like a lot of complexity around it. But if you think of our price, it's actually kind of simple, right? Like there's a title and there's the price, and that's it. But we have this complexity around it. Like, do we display it twice? If it's the dual pricing, if it's members only or booked, we only display it once. If it's free, we don't display it at all. So what we did is we moved that very simple definition list markup into a partial, and then we move the logic around when to render it into our decorator method. And I think this is something to think about, like, where is there repetition that maybe isn't quite so obvious or is happening a variable number of times, or the thing that's repeating is really simple, but it actually like makes your code harder to understand and harder to maintain and less clear. And all of this is really about sort of an unattainable goal that I've been thinking about, which is, can you move all your design changes just into CSS? Can your markup be about your model and your content and displaying that, and then having the design and the visual indicators and making things pretty, which is obviously really important, but can it happen just in CSS? Because that's really what CSS is good at, right?
Yeah, and I think that if you're constantly changing your brand or like learning from your design decisions, you do want something that's global and that can be easily changed and updated and made better.
So you may have had a reaction to this, and it may have thought it was awesome or the worst thing in the whole world. And we sort of had both of those reactions from some of our teammates. And I think most of the challenges are kind of emotional. There's something like that feels really antithetical to the way that we're taught how to do our jobs about this. And the one that I think affects developers more than designers is this is stupid. It's stupid to move something from the right to the left. And it kind of is, but like, on the other hand, how awesome is it that you have a story that's like so stupid and trivial that you can do it right now, and then you just keep doing that, and you've deployed like 12 different things in one day. And also, we saw how it actually totally was a huge deal and ruined the experience, and that allowed us to, you know, stop right then, make a decision about what we were going to do about that problem, because we all know that browsers are difficult. And also, it meant that, you know, we could just revert that very small change. So it's stupid, but it's good stupid.
And of course, design is like, this is a little bit ugly. Like, I don't understand. Like, I know you're really smart and I know you're good at your job, and why can't you just fix this in like 5 seconds for me? And I think it's about understanding that you don't want to block a deploy. And even though it's ugly for like 5 minutes, in the grand scheme of things, is it worth it to like make a fuss over this? And wouldn't you rather make your product consistently better versus like dragging your feet on a font size or a color or something weird like that? And really like major redesigns usually end up pretty ugly. Like, you're pretty dejected afterwards in some cases, maybe you're not, but I think that the design often feels a little bit broken because you have to make quick changes or you have to like make compromise. So in the end, if you can just feel more a part of that process and you can like understand it a little bit better, then it's worth the ugliness for 5 minutes.
Right. And I think that a really good thing to think about is like, in our magical heads, major redesigns and these other techniques turn out perfect, but like in reality, they don't turn out perfect. I've never experienced them turn out perfect. And so part of this process is about kind of accepting that reality and going with it instead of working against it, and really like getting everybody on the same team. And so I think at like a fundamental level, what we're talking about is creating a conversation between designers and developers and making it so it's designers and developers and not designers versus developers, and creating this environment of collaboration and the realization that you're all really working towards the same goal, which is creating a really awesome product and making a really awesome business.
And I think kind of the secondary part of this, which is just as important, if not more important, is that you're creating a conversation between you and your users. If you're constantly pushing out new changes and new features and updating design, we do a lot of user testing, so taking the feedback that we get from those sessions and like improving our products, then the money that our users pay every month towards us is actually for a reason, and they're not sitting there paying for something for 6 months that never changes or never gets better. And they're really like, oh, hey, like these things are improving, and they're not improving like all at once on me, so I like don't know how to use the site that I come to every day, but they're like a smooth transition into a better, more improved experience.
And I think Facebook might be the best example of why it's bad to make huge changes on your users. And since we're subscription-based, like we can't have our users creating Facebook groups about how much they hate our site, right? So it's really about giving them this extra level of value and this really visible amount of value, especially when they're paying you monthly. Okay, so now we would like to have a conversation with you about this process and making design changes. So you can get in touch with us on the internet or grab us afterwards, or we're happy to take any questions. Yeah? We've actually done both. So we've A/B tested small changes. It tends to depend where they are and the reasons for the design. So we've had design and feature changes that are more like organizational, like we need to do this because there's a scaling issue or because customer service is getting this huge influx of issues. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.